Hello, BookTube. Welcome to another fiction review. Before we get started, must explain these photographs. Firstly, they've got nothing whatsoever to do with the book that we're going to look at today. I couldn't think of a thematic way to make my photographs match this novel, so I just gave up. I went in the exact opposite direction. I gave in to a frivolous Christmas spirit. What you're going to see is photographs of the fruitcakes, the Christmas fruitcakes that we have made and I have decorated in years past. Now, you bear in mind, though, I'm not a professional, okay? I'm just an enthusiastic amateur, and I stress the word enthusiasm, okay? I also wanted to say that I've really enjoyed the first month of my Read What You Own challenge. I finished the book that we're going to talk about today in November, so altogether I managed to read 6 books. So that's 2 more than I would have anticipated. And during November, I also bought and assembled one of those tall floor lamps, and that's for the person who watches television. I already had a lamp behind my armchair for reading, and he wanted to read more, but the corner where his chair is, it's a little dark. So now that he has his own light, he's reading more. And now the television is sometimes quiet in the evenings, and we both are sitting together reading our respective books. And I think that helped me read more as well, you know. Anyway, let's look at today's book, which is The Innocent by Harlan Coben, published in 2005 by Orion Books Limited, and I owned a paperback copy. Now I'm going to pitch this novel. The Innocent is a mystery and a thriller. It's the kind of story where the first half of the book presents you with a load of information. You just go from question to question to question. There's tons of untied loose ends. Then the second half of the book, slowly, all of those loose ends get tied together and sewn up into a nice, neat little bundle by the end. Harlan Coben has proven himself over and over again to be expert at this kind of story. If there's anybody out there who hasn't read any Harlan Coben, I find that hard to believe, but I suppose there could be. If you like suspense and you like a bit of a puzzle, then he's a very safe recommendation for me to make. I think it's also good to say that Coben's books would be helpful for people who are starting to read for the first time, coming back to reading after a long time away, or just people who only really like to read on holiday. And that's because Coben puts this high priority on accessibility, on making sure he can reach his audience. His sentences don't get too long. His vocabulary stays conversational, and he has such a beautiful professional pace and plotting that you don't have to invest very much attention before something interesting happens or before the next interesting thing happens. Where did I obtain this book? Well, technically, this book belongs to the person who watches television, but in our house, books are always considered joint property. I could not say where or when he bought The Innocents, and come to think of it, there's a slim chance that I may have purchased it for him. Because if you read crime and thrillers, you're so easy to buy for. The supermarket, where I get my groceries, has a very modest book section. I don't often find something there that I want to read, but guaranteed I will find at least 1, probably 2 titles that are perfectly suitable for the person who watches television. And so sometimes, I bring him home a surprise. Oh, by the way, the paperback edition of The Innocents that I read was 439 pages long, but those pages were smaller than usual and the font was a little larger than usual. So it wouldn't surprise me if a different edition was shorter, maybe something more like 320 to 350 pages, around there. Right, a little about the author now. Harlan Coben was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1962, and from his senior year at college, he was determined he was going to be a writer, and he must have set out working right away because his first novel was published when he was 26. And you can divide his fiction career into sort of 3 chunks, if you like, 3 phases. The first, of course, his first 2 novels were standalone thrillers. Then he did a slight change of direction, and he wrote a collection of novels where there was an investigative protagonist, a sports agent called Myron Bolitar. And then in the 21st century, and this was where perhaps his books came over to the UK, he began another series of standalone thrillers. And I remember these because they were heavily publicized in the United Kingdom. I can remember posters all over the London Underground, right? And they just showed this bleak gray landscape, the title of the book and the author's name, and then down at the bottom this tagline: David Beck has just received an email from his dead wife. To date, Coben has written 36 books, sold 80 million copies, just phenomenal. Tell No One has been made twice into a film, and 7 of his other books have been made into Netflix television series. If you wish you could know the secrets to Coben's success, well, you're in luck, because he will be hosting an online thriller writing course via the platform BBC Maestro. And of course, check out my description box, because I will put a link there for you. Okay, let's talk about the setting. The Innocent is set in Newark, New Jersey, with short excursions to Connecticut and Nevada. But the important thing that the novel will focus on is the contrast between nice neighborhoods. You know the kind, expensive properties, and everyone looks good, so sometimes it's assumed that everyone is good. And that's contrasted with those not so nice neighborhoods where things are less new, less expensive, less manicured, and sometimes the conclusions you draw about people, yeah, you see where I'm going there. Our protagonist, he grew up in a good part of Newark, in Livingston, but now he's in Irvington, right, where the local landmark is a 185-foot high water tower in the shape of a beer bottle. Here's a quote from pages 22 to 23. They lived in what most would consider a seedy area, in the strangely comforting shadow of the giant beer bottle of Irvington. When he was fresh out of prison, Matt felt he deserved no better, which worked neatly because he could afford little better. And despite protestations from family, he began renting space 9 years ago. Irvington is a tired city, with a large African-American population, probably north of 80%. Some might reach the obvious conclusion about guilt over what he'd had to be like in prison. Matt knew that such things were never so simple, but he had no better explanation other than he couldn't yet return to the suburbs. The change would have been too fast, the land equivalent of the Bends. Either way, this neighborhood, the Shell gas station, the old hardware store, the deli on the corner, the winos on the cracked sidewalk, the cut-throughs to Newark Airport, the tavern hidden near the old Pabst Brewery, had become home. Now, this novel starts with an interesting way of doing narrative viewpoint. It begins with a prologue that's written in second person and present tense. So the opening line, "You never meant to kill him." It's very good. And then later on, there's quotes like, "You have an older brother whom you worship and a younger sister whom you tolerate." The effect, of course, of all this you for a few pages is that it links you, it identifies you with the protagonist. The protagonist story is your story. Now, once the novel starts properly, then Coben reverts back to third person, past tense, what I call the comfort zone of fiction. The narrator gets behind the eyes of a lot of different characters to give you some different viewpoints, but the greatest amount of time will be spent with Matt Hunter. And he's the person who must work out all the mysteries in the book because his marriage and his freedom depend upon it. The next question I always ask is, does this novel fit a genre label? But it's not a question that we need right now. Coben, if you know and you like his work, he becomes one of those safe haven kind of authors, the ones who they know their niche and they set up home there. They become the literary equivalent of a home you can always return to as a reader, where you always find things just as you expect them to be, where your stay is always comfortable. Coben is an author I could turn to if I were in a reading slump. I know he would rescue me. Is there anything that stands out as an aspect of this novel? Well, yeah, actually. I've read 3 Harlan Coben novels now. And The Innocent is different, and it's different because of the number of named characters that are introduced. You will meet one new person every 2 pages on average for the first 20% of the book. Now, that was a little too much for me, okay, with my rubbish memory. I had to open up an Excel spreadsheet and start a character list so that I could just keep track of who was who. I also found one contradiction, very tiny detail. There's a character named Kyra, and she has a different surname on page 127 than she had on page 76. And she doesn't get married in that time. And the difference doesn't turn out to have it doesn't fit the mystery or answer a question or anything like that. It's never even explained. So I just figured it had to be just, one of those days for the copy editor. Is there problematic content in this book? Yep. The story does spend time with underage girls working in the sex trade, and they're there because they were forced or deceived or they didn't have anywhere else to go. That being said, Coben only has one description of a girl in bed with a client, and there's literally just minimal detail given so that you understand what's going on, and then he shifts the focus of the scene. There's nothing gratuitous about it, and sex work is not glorified in this novel. There are some descriptions of violence, but again, Coben relies more on the mystery and the puzzle of everything to keep his readers' attention. So more than, just thrilling them with the salacious. I'm really proud to say that I was able to make one correct guess about one aspect of the whole puzzle of the book, but it says something still for Coben's skill that I didn't even get to that insight until page 312. But there is, I think, a real purpose to the problematic content in this book. The theme that runs through this novel is like a question. How easy is it to judge who is innocent and who is not? When does an innocent person, right, in the process of getting justice for themselves, in the process of defending their loved ones from harm, when does innocence cross the line and truly become evil? The characters in this book, they cross lines between good and bad all over the place. But meanwhile, society is judging them differently. Some of them get judged based on their actions, some of them don't. And it all depends sometimes on what job they do or how expensive their house is. You will be able, I think, to gauge your own personal values by the judgments that you pass on the people in this book. And that's our review wrapped up. I don't really have any related follow-up reading. If I were the person who watches television, of course, I would just read another mystery or thriller, might even read another Harlan Coben. But of course, I've made the point on previous videos that once I've finished a book of a particular kind, I tend to go off in a totally different direction, don't I? Earlier this week, I watched Kim at Middle of the Book March and Hannah at Hannah's Books. They were talking about their upcoming buddy read, which is going to be Willa Cather's 1913 novel, O Pioneers. I have O Pioneers on my Kindle. And with the craziness of Christmas approaching, when I'm going to find myself standing in lines, waiting in parked cars, being a passenger in a car, on a train, how much easier is reading going to be? If I don't have to remember to pack a paper book with me, I just read something off my mobile phone because I have that with me all the time. My next video will probably be a Middlemarch meditation, but I also recall promising to make some content that would talk about a weird little book that came out in the 1970s. I think Joseph Francis Burton said there was a time when you would find a copy of this book in practically any home you visited, usually in the bathroom. Now, I agree with that observation. I can attest to the bathroom phenomenon. Don't know why it happened. Mystery. But look out for that, for some light-hearted material in the run-up to Christmas. Thanks for joining me today, everybody. Take care. Happy reading. Bye-bye.